So it's not every day that you get to sit down and interview your own boss. And so this is really exciting. And I think, for us in this year, the purpose of this show is going to be talking about what's happening in our community, the problems that we're seeing. How are we highlighting the people who are leading these new solutions, and then how are we engaging change makers to lean in and help make a difference. And this year, right, 2020, has been so unique, obviously, between having a global pandemic. A lot of conversations, obviously, about justice and race, Easter tornadoes, and election, potential COVID on the rise, and all this stuff. And you lead a community-based nonprofit in the middle of all this, which is built to help unite organizations and people to solve these problems. So from this past year, right, what are some of the biggest things that you've been learning and seeing?
Well, there are many. I think, Stephen, if you had told me in January that any of these things would happen, I would have had a hard time believing you, much less all three, kind of in this perfect storm of community change and need and opportunity. And, 2020, leading an organization like United Way through this, it feels like you're taking a test where the questions change every day and the curriculum is constantly, being edited. So honestly, every day has been really critical that we as people and as community servants, that we're just able to have our finger on the pulse of where the needs are and really have a sense of what I would call patient urgency. And that may sound like an oxymoron, but it's really just what I've been learning through this season. Patient urgency in the sense that we have to be urgent in crisis response for our neighbors. I mean, people are literally losing their lives, in some cases their futures, their financial stability and footing, their child's educational opportunities. Those are urgent things. But I say patient urgency because we also know that to respond well, we've got to respond together. And that type of people-first relationship building requires patience. We've got to be sure that we're moving at the speed of trust with our partners in our community. And so striking that balance has been tough. But it's one that is constantly at the forefront of our mind and our organization. Respond with urgency, but do it in a way that is sustainable and that will last.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like on top of this, response, the way we have to engage now, right, is different.
It
right?
is.
Like you and I are sitting 6 feet apart, right? Like we have to be very thoughtful, right? Like have a mask, and we were both wearing these like right before we start filming. So
exactly.
So like how has this year maybe changed? And like there's obviously the literal human to human engagements, but like maybe how have you seen your thinking on what it means to engage the community shift, whether that's personally or for United Way?
That's a great question. I mean, to the point of how United Way engages, everything's changed. A lot of people, United Way as we come to your workplace face to face. We show why investing in community matters. Well, all of that's gone. And I think that it's been an incredible opportunity to show the community that everyone, no matter your age, your background, your job, what you do, that there are opportunities to stay engaged. I think perhaps, though, one of the most powerful things that I've seen happen as a result of COVID-19 and the tornadoes as well, has just been seeing how people come together in incredibly collaborative, aligned ways. The task force, right, for example, that's just something I think that bears talking about today. The 48 hours into the COVID-19 issues, when we found out that the school system was going to be shutting down, it was remarkable to me. We had the school system reach out to us and say, we need your help thinking about the gaps and the problems we're going to be facing in community. And really help us figure out, if we close school for 2 whole weeks, remember when we thought it was 2 weeks? 2 whole weeks, what impact is that going to have on our children and on those who need to go to work and on the kids who are only fed at school? And so, right here in this space we're sitting in, we just started throwing up all the gaps and discrepancies and issues on the wall, and then trying to figure out who the problem solvers are that we can bring together. And within 48 hours, we had over 100 organizations and people, businesses, nonprofits, churches, neighbors, just concerned citizens coming together to say, we can engage in this in an all new way. And every day on Zoom, we would just literally highlight a problem or a gap and then solve it together in that time frame. And that's been incredible to me. And it's a great way to talk about patient urgency. We were responding to urgent needs, but in a way that we were doing this relationally so that collaboration has staying power. And isn't that what we ultimately want, right? We want to help people in the moment, but we want to ensure that how we do it together is something that can be sustained for a long time.
Yeah, and I think even kind of reflecting on that, right, there are probably a million obstacles that had to be overcome within that 48 hours, right?
Yes.
Like I'm thinking technology, right? Like we can't go see each other, and like you had mentioned relationally, you can't get together and sit at a whiteboard necessarily and knock it all out. It's like we're all doing this together but distantly in our own places. And so like in addition to that story of kind of 48 hours, flipping basically everything over and saying, how are we going to make sure families and kids have meals to eat? I also know that there's this digital equity conversation. How do we make sure kids have the devices and the infrastructure
to learn
supported?
from home?
Are there any other like examples like that when you think over the past 7 months now, that like just jump to the forefront of your brain of like, man, the community stepped up in an amazing way?
Oh, I think it was awesome. I mean, the beauty of United Way is we get to be the facilitator, to bring all these partners together and help folks kind of think through an innovation mindset. It's funny. Someone said to me, innovation is a luxury. And this entire 7 months has taught me that's not true, actually. You innovate the best when you're trying to solve a problem that is urgent, and the typical ways of trying to solve that problem no longer exist, right? So here we are, as you said, an entirely new landscape, and the innovation I saw was remarkable. So I think about partners coming together to feed 45,000 kids in a matter of 4 days. I mean, that's awesome. School system, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, local churches and neighbors. I mean, the list is endless of those who stepped up to create a system that worked for our families. We then had the opportunity to say, man, how many of our senior neighbors are aging at home? And perhaps during the stay-at-home order need their medications. They might be out of food, Stephen. And in the stay-at-home time, is anyone checking on them? And I was blown away to see how we were able to pull together partners and make a call for virtual volunteers to literally call every one of our senior neighbors and check on them. Wow. And in that moment, we could just say, how are you? I mean, what a hopeful phone call to get, right? That there's someone out there, a stranger that you've never even met, who cared enough to call you and check on you. And in those moments, we could direct them then to resources and to our 211 line at United Way. And I think one of my favorite just stories on how this came full circle was getting a note in the mail addressed to me from one of our probably 75-year-old neighbors who said, Dear United Way, I got a phone call from someone asking if I was okay. And literally that day, she'd just run out of food. And through that connection, by the very next day, 211 connected with the food bank for the box of food that was delivered to her doorstep by CARTA, our other community partner through city government. I mean, that's amazing. That's the power of connected community when you see people plus resources, plus all of just different pathways, right, in order to meet needs. And then it really helps real people. Yeah. So take that story and amplify it thousands of times over. That has been a really encouraging part of this very, very difficult season.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting, kind of that idea of like people, right? Like there's, design thinking and user-centered design and all that kind of
lots
stuff.
Lots of big words.
Right, like
blah, blah,
lots
blah,
of really
blah.
fun stuff to play around theoretically. Yeah. But like the practical need was that individuals are experiencing preventable pain.
Right.
And so how do we remove a lot of these barriers that might like seem like something we can normally dance around to actually help people? So this idea of people first, it's not the first time I've heard you talk about that.
That's
but can
right.
you talk a little bit about maybe what that has meant to you in the midst of working through the season? You've already touched on it, but whether that's the work you've seen outlaid, or maybe what that now has kind of been redefined as when you look at the work in community.
Yeah, we started exploring this idea of people first really last year at United Way. And in full transparency, I don't think I understood what it meant until now. It's easy, I think, in organizations to talk a lot about your culture and people and how important that is. But oftentimes, Stephen, I think we just see that too many businesses, too many organizations just are so goal-centric that they're running towards meeting goals no matter what, no matter the impact or the process or how you're getting there. And so during this season of COVID, it's interesting to me because this idea of people first for us means that we are going to care for our people inside the United Way first so that we can be people first externally, right? We are only as good as our own ability to serve and only as good as our own ability to really invest in the volunteers and the partners across the community. So for us, people first means just relationship first. And United Way does that at scale, which I think is a very just amazing and interesting concept. So through this whole season, it's just become very clear to me what it means to really focus on people first. And I think it means, and what we've seen is people leave their logos at the door, right?
Yeah.
Completely willing to do the opposite of what we've taught for years, which was stay inside your mission, don't creep out, right? Stay focused. Well, we need to stay focused. That hasn't changed. But we've seen how United Way has pivoted and how organizations all across this community are doing things differently and without any sense of ego to serve people first. And I think about Boys and Girls Club. They're not in the food delivery business. They're not in, the business of serving elderly neighbors. But the very first, family that we got to help through United Way's Restore Hope Fund, where we were, taking the generosity of our community to help those families who had lost work or been furloughed due to COVID-19. We knew that there was a tremendous need. And we worked through incredible partners on the ground who we know were trusted. And the Boys and Girls Club connected with a grandmother of 2 kids who had lost her job in the hotel industry. She'd been there for 30 years, and she was literally making the decision of, do I pay the light bill or put food on the table? And we're going to be evicted and homeless in the next month. And so it's not in the mission of the Boys and Girls Club to provide financial stability, but they were the ones to make that connection. And then we got to partner with them to help deliver 100,000 meals in the East Lake, East Side community. That's just where we've seen people being willing to grow and change and stretch to meet real needs of people.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of pivoting, right?
Lots of it. Yeah. I think that's my least favorite word right now, just because we use it so much, but we use it because we have to. We're constantly changing the way we do business. But don't let that mean that we're not being intentional. We're not just flying by the seat of our pants to change. I think that what we've seen is that the beauty of this season is that the community has been very intentional in how we pivot and how we change.
Yeah, that's huge. Being able to pivot, being able to kind of live in both worlds where you understand what your core mission is, but you're not tone deaf to the needs of those around you.
Right. Exactly.
And you're able to reconcile those and realize that at the end of the day, I have to help people right now in front of me if I really even want to see that mission ever come to fruition.
Absolutely.
Man, that's huge. Well, and obviously, we've seen partners do amazing work. We've been able to sit in really great conversations with unique collaboration that organizations are doing, ways that organizations are completely flipping things on their head. As we're looking ahead, I think one of the biggest things 2020 has taught us to date, and we still have 3 more months to go, so who knows what's coming. But
we're not done yet.
But one of the things it's taught us is you can't be prepared for every single problem that may or may not come to your community, right?
Right.
And so, looking at that and looking at that we're walking into the uncertainty of the end of the year, the start of 2021, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think are kind of sitting right in front of our community? And they could be new ones that surface because of what's been happening, and it could be maybe other ones that have been accelerated because of the pandemic.
Yeah. If you don't mind, let me hit on a few.
Yeah.
And I want to start, though, with, I think, a pervasive problem across our community and probably communities all across this nation that is only being amplified as a result of what we've seen in 2020. And then maybe drill down to a few things that we're seeing that might be new that we've got to address. Do you remember a couple of years ago? I talk about my kids a lot, right? And if you remember a couple of years ago, I came into work and I shared with you all and then with the whole community about the day that Charlie, my youngest, comes in the house in tears after school because he went upstairs and he realized that Goldie, his goldfish, had died. Remember this?
I do remember this.
Well, we had, the goldfish funeral and flushed him down the toilet and sadly went about our day. Well, it wasn't until the very next day that Charlie got home from school and he saw that all of the fish in his fish tank were dead. And he looked at me and he said something so profound because it connects to community. He said, "Mom, Goldie wasn't a sick fish. There's something wrong with the water." And in that moment, I just had this realization that, my goodness, how in a community like Chattanooga, where we can be known as both the best place to live if you make $100,000 or more, can we also be known as one of the worst places in America for a child to grow up poor? How can we be a community where 4,000 babies will be born this year? 2,200 of them into economic insecurity. And that was before COVID, Stephen. And I think what really got to me was that 70% stay stuck in this generational cycle of poverty and stress. And we take a step back from that as a united way, and we recognize these sweeping disparities in our community, these gaps between those who struggle every day and those who don't. And then we layer on top that we are a generous community. The problem is not philanthropy. We have 1,600 nonprofits, 1,300 churches that are working to respond to these needs. And so I think something we've got to think about in the days to come very clearly is what's in the water that's causing our community to be both the best and the worst, number one. And number two, what are we going to do about it? What is at the root that's driving this? Because we can't just approach our community with a way of saying, let's fix sick fish, right? Because then we're always going to have problems that are bubbling up. We have to get to the root of what's happening. So through this COVID pandemic, I believe that those disparities are just even, just a light has been shown on them and to a much greater degree. Prior to COVID, we had 43% of our neighbors working hard, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, but struggling to meet basic needs. Like, how do I keep the lights on, put food on the table, pay for a phone, a cell phone, or internet service, for example. And now, post-COVID, I can only imagine what that looks like for so many of our families today. The disparities are greater. So I think the urgency to figure out how we use the momentum of this moment to figure out what's at the root. We've got to do that as a community. Meet basic needs, yes. Triage problems, yes, it's important, but we cannot miss the fact that we want to emerge from this in 5 years' time, having fixed what's at the root.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I think maybe a follow-up question with that is, right, because there is obviously, and I think this has been a conversation that we've seen at the local, state, national, regional, all the levels, right? And we've seen just kind of in the midst of this, the pandemic, I think back to Some Good News, right, with John Krasinski, if you remember that. I was like, man, I could really use some good news right now. I don't know why he stopped doing that. But we've seen obviously just this intensity. And I don't know if it's because obviously the election's coming up and ad campaigns, digital ads are, I'm sure I'm not alone that every single ad I get is for 1 or 2 or 5 candidates. I don't know. And text messages, all that stuff.
Turn off the TV.
I know, right? Just turn it all off. But, we see such like a rise in like divisiveness. And I think one of the themes I've caught on that you've been touching on is like this need for unity, and obviously maybe it's the United Way name, but like a drive to unity. So how do we move into an uncertain future when there can seem to be so much division amongst ourselves? I think like there's a problem of like, man, we have all these external problems. We have, financial issues. Like how do we move forward when we live in such a culture that can seem to thrive on like trying to be divided?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. It's really tough because in some cases it feels like people could very obviously be afraid to move or do anything or say anything because of this divisiveness that exists. But, a couple of things I think are really important to remember. One is I saw this incredible study that looked at so many Americans asking what we cared about. And no matter someone's socioeconomic level, no matter their gender, their race, their background, where they live, urban, rural, suburban, it all came down to people caring about their personal safety and their own sense of freedom and agency, meaning having control over your life, purpose, and having a true connection to others and to their community. And I think it's important to remember that that's just what makes us human. And that at the core, no matter what we see on TV, all of that still remains true. And there's some hopeful things happening right now. There is a lot of good news, not just in the outcomes and the results we see of what it means for neighbors to help neighbors, but I do see our community leaning in more, getting closer to the issues that really matter, and being willing sometimes to be really uncomfortable in order to figure out how we can serve each other better. I can see that in my own life, I can see it at United Way, and I can see it across our community that people are recognizing that they've got power to change their community. So one of the places I think I would say let's start in this divisive world is to recognize the resources and the connectivity and the power that you have and that I have and that everyone listening to this has. We all have influence over something. And let's feel empowered by that. And then let's figure out what good we can do with it for our community. I think that those simple things go a long way in healing some of the divisiveness. But let's also not forget what makes us human. Yeah. And it is that connectivity to each other. And that's encouraging.
Yeah, it's good. I think this idea of taking as much agency that you currently have and being able to say, okay, how can I start, obviously, with the attitude that I have. I know for me, some days it can be very tempting to just feel so much despair, like I can't actually change anything.
Yeah,
right?
I can't change anything.
Why even try? And so I think that's such a huge. It sounds like really simple to go change your attitude. It's not that easy, of course.
Right.
But I think that like being able to start saying, how can I look for positivity? How can I look for opportunity? I think some of the stories that you've already shared already kind of lend itself to that. And so kind of with that. I'm interested, we've talked a little bit about some other stories that have been happening out in the community. What's some other things where you've seen maybe United Way at work in the midst of all this? It's not, maybe not as front facing, but it's has some of these same implications when it comes to engaging with the community or systems that might not have helped in the past, but are being ramped up now to help as we move into that future.
Yes. Well, so much comes to mind there. I think those sticking to this idea that we all have a part to play in creating the community we want to see, which sounds like such a cliche, but it's not, because we do have power and agency over the difference that we make. it's easy to see the stories of COVID response and the 800 families impacted through our Restore Hope Fund, right? Or the people calling into 211 and our team on the other side helping connect people in need to these vast resources. Or even the stories, through our community investment process of how we're investing millions of dollars into frontline organizations that collaborate to show real results around education, health, and well-being. I mean, it's amazing. But I always like to go back to the quieter stories of just neighborhood leaders, people who see a need and are willing to step up and make a difference. We had the opportunity this past year to get to know a man named Ken Smith, who is the Avondale Neighborhood Association president. And I just think it's remarkable because here Ken sits in this neighborhood. He looks around and he sees a problem. He says, why do none of our neighbors in this neighborhood and our people of color living in this neighborhood own their homes? They want to own their homes, right? Talk about having power over your future and a sense of control is owning your home and your property. And he was recognizing that this was an issue, and it wasn't because of a lack of desire. It was just a lack of pathways and knowledge to make it a reality. So Ken steps, into this with United Way, gets the data to really dig deeper and say, okay, what's the problem? What's at the root? What's in the water that's causing this issue in our community? And then how can we bring together people to make a solution? And so Ken, alongside other neighborhood leaders and the United Way and community partners, just start training people in the basics of home ownership. And as this process unfolds, banks come to the table. They want to lend money so people can buy their homes. Businesses come to the table. Construction companies come and say, hey, if you can secure a loan, we're going to help you build a house. This is all because one guy saw a problem, wanted to get to the root of what was causing it, and then came together with others across the community to fix it. Like, those are the things we need to remember about our ability to make change. We all can be heroes in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think one thing that's sticking out based on what you're saying is like something that I might take for granted now, because obviously I work at United Way, but United Way, when I was growing up and all that kind of stuff, it was like, oh, I give money to United Way and they take money. And I kind of thought of it like the social sector bank, right? Like I give money
the
to
community chest.
Exactly. The community chest, literally in Monopoly.
We literally were
the community chest. It's hilarious. Fun fact of trivia.
It is.
But everything you're saying though is so unlike what I used to think the United Way was like.
That's right.
And so, and some of these stories might be this year, but I know that a lot of the movement and this collaboration and this wanting to take solutions to scale, wanting to find people like Ken Smith who say, I just want to make difference, and then taking as much friction away from him. Yeah. I feel like that's a huge part of the role United Way plays and desires to continue playing, not just in the pandemic, but afterwards, of course.
That's right. Yeah.
And so what do you think, maybe even whether it's the pandemic or not, like how has United Way's mission either been refined or redefined in the midst of this to a lot of the things you were already talking about?
Great question. We have made a very clear shift from community chest to community change agent. And thankfully, that shift was already occurring prior to the pandemic. So we were more well positioned to bring together a cross sector of partners, examine real life data, both lived experience, people's life stories and getting close to the issues in community, then bringing together the right partners to help present solutions and then invest in them and scale them up. That's a very different model. Yeah. And so thankfully, we'd already been working in that way. And what that means is it's inviting the entire community into the United Way beyond just their dollar inside their workplace campaign. We've always been the place to give help and get help. And that has been really needed in this season, right? People who've never needed help before need help now. And we want them to know where to turn, and they can turn to the United Way. And people who have wanted to give help, right, but don't know where to turn or who to trust, we want them to know that the United Way is a place to bring them together. But through the power of collaboration At United Way, 1 + 1 = 4. And that's what I love about it, right? We can take your dollar and your volunteer hour and this organization's expertise and this company's, specialty, and put those things together to see a much more sustainable outcome. Yeah, and we've seen that happen through COVID in really amplified ways. I mean, think about EPB and TVA, right, yeah. Stephen? I mean, as well as I do, the power of that collaboration and what that has meant.
Oh, yeah.
We have a company that says, man, our customers that we care deeply about can't pay their utility bills. And without power, how in the world will they work remotely, educate their children, just keep the lights on, right? And so they realized, my goodness, if we can invest in a solution with the United Way, we can actually help our customers, help our base. But now they're scaling that up through partnership with TVA. And then through a long list of community partners who are trusted and on the ground. That's where you start to see 1 + 1 = 4 for our community members.
Right. And the impact
much bigger than the community chest model.
Absolutely, right? It's the fun term to sound really fun is like transactional is one way where I give money and it does this output, to transformational where make an investment, right? And we see that yield a lot. And the TVA example is a great one where I know for them, a lot of that was an investment in the economic regrowth of Chattanooga, right?
Exactly.
And that's how they saw it. It's like, this is an effort to not just like sustain, but then to say, how do we thrive? How do we get out of this thriving, which is huge.
And the data piece really does matter, right? Because needs are everywhere, but we have such a commitment to figure out the trends, where needs are moving, where they're shifting, what's happening. You asked earlier about the long-term outcomes or the problems of COVID-19. It's not just that disparities are growing wider. It's that we've got to be able to look at data and understand, what this is going to mean for our children in the years to come. And what this is going to mean for our Alice families or those who are working hard, but right on that borderline of poverty, and figure out where those trends are moving so that we can deploy resources where they're most needed to empower people, not just to Band-Aid something, but to really empower people.
Man, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Being able to pivot like that and look at both the short-term needs of today that we're seeing surface, but then also have a mindset for the future of how is this going to play out in 21, and how do we have a plan, and how are we partnering with the right people to think short-term and long-term, which is huge.
It's true. And we use this idea of reimagine, which I love, because we do have to reimagine our systems. We have to reimagine our partnerships. We have to reimagine how we engage with community, to honestly live in a community where your zip code doesn't define everything about your future. And I just read something recently. Daniel Goleman, he's the guy, like the founder of emotional intelligence, which is something we all want, right? Yeah. Your EQ, not your IQ. And he said that to really reimagine something, it requires the ability to really live with a positive outlook, but deeply rooted in reality, and with a shared sense of purpose for serving others. And I just think that's really neat. That's what we've been trying hard to do. And it's really difficult to keep a positive outlook, but 1 foot in reality, while we're also keeping 1 foot in the future, recognizing that, we have to not just respond to the crisis of today, but make sure that we're using this momentum of this really tough time, but also a time when people are coming together like never before to propel us forward.
Yeah. And this next question might kind of fly with what you were just saying too, in terms of this idea of like having to live in one reality, a mindset for the other, and then this kind of gap to propel us forward is like, what's something maybe that's happened this year at United Way, or just you've observed in terms of community development that like you didn't expect? It could be positive or negative.
Yeah. Well, with the positive mindset I just mentioned, I'll say something positive. And then I'll also share something challenging. The fact that we could make changes in our community and progress towards problem solving that would have taken decades if we actually approached it in a traditional way. I mean, our community, moved at the speed of light. But that didn't mean unintentionally, but at the speed of light to address needs, because it was a life and death situation. And businesses, if you had told a 10,000 person company that they had to figure out how everyone could work from home in a matter of 48 hours, it would have taken them 10 years to figure that out. Right. But they did it in 2 days. So I think that I've been most surprised by the speed with which we can move. And you know what that tells me, Stephen, is that we can solve these problems. The things that we thought were insurmountable in community, like poverty and education, we can make progress. The issue is, boiling the lake isn't working.
Right.
Sometimes we do have to move faster. And that's been a real pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
Or boiling the ocean. I guess that's the analogy, not boiling the lake. I think from a challenge point of view, and this is something that we are just beginning to understand what the impact is going to be, is the impact of toxic stress on our children. United Way had already been deeply involved in this ACEs work, which is about adverse childhood experiences that typically come from abuse, toxic stress, living in poverty, being around an adult substance abuse, those types of things. And what we know is that when kids experience multiple, adverse childhood experiences, it literally makes a difference in their cognitive ability to learn. This is huge, especially the younger they are. And the thing that was keeping me up at night the most through COVID wasn't feeding people, because we were getting that done. It was the fact that child abuse referrals went to zero during the stay-at-home order. You know what that means?
It seems, you would think, oh, that's a good thing. It's gone away, right?
Right. Yeah. What we learned, though, is that the first responders, the teachers, the counselors, the coaches, the protectors, no longer had access to kids. And so we have a long road ahead of us to determine how we reimagine and rebuild the future for our children in this season, who may not just be stressed by the financial implications of COVID, or may not just be stressed by, a family's other stressors like substance abuse, or, needing to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. I learned in a board meeting last week of a board I serve on that they are projecting that kids are 2 years behind in school because of what's happened since March. So we have to live in one foot in the crisis of today, and then also figure out together, all of us, how to fix those issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. Well, and I think, right, it's going to take everyone to help solve those issues too, right? Which is the thing. You can't outsource your community's issues. You live in community, and so there is this kind of going back to what you're saying, what am I going to do? And
that is a bright spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that for a long time, people just assumed the nonprofit sector handled all those issues.
Right.
I give my money, this nonprofit will fix this issue, and then report results back to me. Well, I think what this has shown through COVID is the amazing response across sectors. That the only way that we could respond quickly and well was if government, business, neighbors, faith, all of these institutions, and then nonprofits come together in a new way to solve problems. And that's what we're going to have to carry forward.
Interesting. So, yeah, it makes sense, right?
It's harder.
Yeah.
It's harder. But, think about the resources that we have at our disposal when all of those sectors bring their own expertise and they bring their own, as I said earlier, think about your own power, right? What you bring to the situation. When we pull different sectors and organizations together, that's what we see. And the outcome is a much grander response and a much more sustainable long-term answer.
That makes so much sense. So with that in mind, what do you think, because you've already mentioned that there have been some bigger problems or challenges that have kind of arisen due to what's been happening. And there's obviously this uncertainty of what may happen in the future. Right. What do you think is going to be required of our community as we move forward in the days, weeks, months, years ahead, right? I think of that 2-year gap, right, in my brain now when I'm even asking that question. Right. But what is going to be required of us in order to be part of that solution.
You know, I think it goes back to my initial point about patient urgency. I think it's going to require us, just as community members and as neighbors, to recognize that we have something to give, and to not grow weary in giving it. And what I mean by that is, you know, we thought that this pandemic would last a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, right? And here we sit, months and months later. And so what we're going to need is for our community to say, you know, I'm willing to, one, open my eyes to the true issues in community and maybe get out of my comfort zone a little bit. And United Way has ways that people can do that and really begin to learn about what's in the water and how do we start to address it. I think that we are going to need our nonprofits to collaborate like never before. Resources are more scarce than they were before. And through United Way and our efforts with Venture Forward, you know, we're helping our nonprofits figure out how to be as effective as they can and shift their mindset towards one of, this is not my thing and my lane, but if we could team up, we could save money and have a much greater impact and response. And we want to help our nonprofit community do that well. And then I think we want to see our businesses recognize the power they have in this effort. We've already seen how companies help their own employees through the COVID pandemic, and you know, are setting up funds to help them or providing childcare. We want to build on this new way of thinking about how we support our employees and our teammates in order to see a better outcome. But most of all, Stephen, I think it's just going to take opening our eyes, asking what we can do, and being willing to take just one small step towards that.
Awesome.
And at scale, we can do it together.
Well, I'm inspired.
Me too.
Yeah.
You know, I've never been more inspired in this job and in this role in the past 5.5 years that I've been here since COVID. And I know that probably sounds horrible to say that out loud. But what I mean is, I love this community, and to see how, you know, since March, not only has United Way risen to the challenge to literally, you know, execute on its mission like never before, but to see the generosity of those in our community who are struggling themselves but asking, what can I do to make a difference? That makes waking up every morning and doing this work such a blessing. And, you know, someone once told me, and I think this is important for every single one of us when it comes to community, is, you know, that we keep our mind focused on why. You know, the idea of start with why. And your why basically comes down to your burden, something you really care about, that you're willing to get close to and understand, and then your talents colliding. And when those two things happen, your purpose becomes really clear. And I think personally for me, that's true. But for United Way, our burden for the disparities in this community and understanding that everyone at some point needs help and can give help. It makes us all the same. Coupling that with our great talent and bringing people together and using resources, you know, wisely, directing them towards the efforts that have the greatest impact, that will help us really move towards our vision, which is honestly a community where everyone can reach their full potential. So this season has been very difficult, but also very inspiring to see what our community can do.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I think, you know, you hit on that. Like, there's those who need help and there's those who can give help. And we're all in a spectrum, right? We're all moving on that spectrum every day, right? And that can be literally from a financial status. It could be a mentality, something happened. And connection. Right. And so I think there's a whole lot there. So we all have something to give, and likely we all frankly need to sit in the posture of humility to realize we have something to learn and to receive.
That's right.
And so kind of with that in mind, I'm sure that people listening to this right now, there's probably fall into two groups, maybe more, but at least two, where someone might be listening to this and saying, I've been really hit hard by this, whether that's I lost someone I love deeply, or I've suffered through this, or you know, I'm struggling financially. And so I guess a question I would have is, like, if you were sitting across from that person, they're saying, like, what can I do, or like, what should I do? What advice would you give to that individual?
First, I would want them to know how much their community loves them and cares about them. And that, right now, all across our neighborhoods, and through the whole area that the United Way serves, people are giving sometimes just this tiny bit out of their paycheck to help them. And so that then they turn around and become generous to someone else. I would say to them to have hope because their community cares deeply about them. And then I would tell them very practically where to go to get help, right? I would encourage them to call 211, which is United Way's first line of response for anything that someone needs, whether it's a tutor for your child, or access to health care, or where the next meal is going to come from. That is what we are here to do, is to connect people to resources so that they can actually see their neighbors care for them lived out in a really powerful way. And then, frankly, I would say to those who sit in a position right now of, I have a lot to give, that we've got a lot of ways for them to engage in that way as well. If you're under 40, lean into the issues in our community and join up with our emerging leaders group.
Right.
If you're a woman in this community who cares deeply about other women raising children and wants to dig deeper into those issues and do something to advocate and support, join Women United, right? We've got ways to even volunteer in this season, even when it's virtual. We can still make a difference virtually and stay connected. I keep coming back to this idea that we know connected community changes everything. Right. And we're living in a season where disconnection is almost required of us, but it doesn't have to be. There are things that we can do together to get close to the issues in community and make a difference, even if we have to do it sitting at home, calling from your cell phone to check on your neighbor. And if people want to know where to go, we're here for that. That's what United Way's core mission is we want, if you need help, you know where to go. And if you want to give help, you know how to do that as well.
That's awesome. Well, good. Well, I think, we've covered a pretty wide range of topics throughout this entire conversation. But I think that's such a great way to end, is that on both ends, whether you're in a position to give help or need help, there's hope, right? Which is that there's hope that you, in both ways, you can be part of the solution for the community, and that as you're on your own personal journey there, for what it looks like to be in this community, to give and receive from your community, right? That you're in good company. Yeah,
that's right.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you. It was my honor.
Yeah, no, this is a great conversation.